give your background on how you got involved with the KGB.
This guy asked me point blank. He said, well, are you in or not? And I went like, well, but I don't know if I'm good enough. I'm not trained. I need to learn this, and this. He said, don't worry about it. We'll train you.
Did you ever meet Yuri?
The man was a fraud. He was not KGB.
How do you know that?
I don't know for a fact.
Okay, so you're just speculating. We've been speaking for 45 minutes. The moment Yuri came up, that was the first time you crossed your arms and you seemed upset.
No, I tell you what makes me upset.
Tell me.
The conservative end of the political spectrum in the United States is shooting the cause in the foot.
You ended up doing counter surveillance for US.
I sort of turned the weapon that they gave me against them. Well, it is what it is. This is how it works in espionage.
We have a special show for you today. Today, my guest is a former KGB defector of almost 15 years, 10 years when he was active spying on the US. And the story is absolutely fascinating on what happened with him. He wrote a book in 2017 called Deep Undercover, My Secret Life and Tangled Allegiance as a KGB Spy in America. With that being said, Jack Barsky, aka Albrecht Dietrich, thank you for being a guest on Valuetainment.
Very good. You win second prize for pronunciating my name because it's really hard.
There you go.
Let me tell you something. My daughter actually changed her last name to my birth name, and she can't pronounce it either.
She changed her last name to your birth name?
She was Chelsea Barsky, and she changed it to Chelsea Dittrich.
Wow. Listen, that says how much your daughter loves you to be able to do something like that. You know,
yes, we have a very special relationship.
It's very obvious. I saw some of the videos, and it's very obvious how big of an impact she had on your life when you said she made me softer and I wanted to change my life, and it even got you emotional about it. But let's get right into it. So, Jack, for those that don't know you, your story is written all over the place. I've known your story for a while. I've been following you for quite a few years in regards to your story. You mind taking a minute and maybe give your background on how you got involved with the KGB?
All right. I give you the Cliff's Note version, because otherwise it gets too long.
Sure.
I was born 4 years after the end of World War II in Eastern Germany, which was occupied by the Soviet Union, by Soviet troops, which became the German Democratic Republic, which was a very, very trustworthy and trusting vassal states to the Soviet Union, almost an extension of the Soviet Union, was run by the Communist Party. And first of all, I grew up in poverty. I grew up in a village, a relatively small village. The area I grew up in was one of the poorest in Germany to begin with, but when the Soviet troops came through on their march towards Berlin, they destroyed a lot of stuff, and that's not a surprise, you know. And then they took half of what was left over that was useful. They took it out of the country for reparations. They had every right to do so. So we had just barely enough to eat, and it was a fight for survival the first few years. I can't remember that because I was too young, but I just can tell you one thing. An anecdote my mother once told me. She said, you know, occasionally I would get an egg, and I make a meal for the three of us. So I really didn't ask what she stretched that egg with. I was afraid of the answer.
Yeah.
Early on, the communists did something really, really smart. They focused on education. They focused on the next generation coming up, and they trained a whole bunch of teachers in the new ideology, and we got an excellent academic education, but we also got a phenomenal amount of indoctrination. Okay, so the communist ideology was involved in almost everything you were doing, regardless of what it was. It could have been sports or theater, the arts, and of course school. So I grew up with the firm knowledge, A, that there was no God, and B, that communism was the future of the world, and it was our responsibility as the next generation to precipitate the move from the bad system that was in the West, like all the old Nazis and the bad capitalists, and eradicate poverty in the world, so we could finally establish the paradise on earth for the working class. I bought into this. It was probably next to impossible not to. There were some dissidents, but typically there were people who had a glimpse of the other world, the West. They had like people who came over, relatives, and they came over and they brought nice presents. They brought oranges, which I didn't see until maybe I was 10 years old. And so they started looking a little bit. we had no such connection, and I had no reason to look. Particularly as I entered college, I was a pretty smart kid. And as I entered college in my first year, I established a reputation of being the best. And in the next couple of years, I enhanced that reputation to an extent that I already had a name for myself. And it was quite clear that I wasn't thinking ruling class, but I was going to be one of the people that, help everybody else that were not quite as smart to live a good life. So I never really investigated, the potential truth or lack thereof of our ideology, of our history. I just believed it because it was good for me. And so the climax of all of this was that at one point I received a national scholarship that was limited to 100 concurrent holders in the entire country. That put me on the map. It put me on the map as far as the KGB researchers are concerned. I was a party member. I was an excellent student. And I do believe, I don't know this for a fact, but I do believe that the Stasi, East German police, gave the KGB access to files. And by the way, there was a file on everybody in the country. And there I was a standout. He's really smart, and he believes in communism. Let's talk to him. And I can stop right here, but I can go a little further.
Yeah, if you don't mind stopping right, I got a couple questions for you. So my question is, when you're there and they're indoctrinating, you said, communism, one of the things they did right is education. They got that part right, which we're seeing a lot of that in America as well. We'll go into that momentarily. But I asked Gary Kasparov, which I'm sure you know who Gary Kasparov is. And the question I asked him, I said, so when you lived in Russia and you're going to school and you're being told communism is the greatest system in the world, economical system, how are they selling America and capitalism to you? What was the ways they sold capitalism or rich people to you?
Let's see if we're in agreement. Obviously you couldn't completely block out information that came from the outside. So there was always this knowledge that the standard of living in West Germany was higher. There was knowledge that the United States was pretty rich, but here was the explanation. They stole all the wealth from the third world. They got the bananas for nothing from Guatemala, and just like it had slave labor in third countries, and that's why they were able to sort of bribe their underclass to have a reasonable standard of living so the rich people would be left alone. That was what we bought. Of course, it wasn't true, but...
What a thing to say. So they got banana from Guatemala for dirt cheap. So, so was it more slave labor? They're not paying people fairly. They're getting fat, rich, and everybody else is doing the work. Is that kind of the route, or was there any other
also
specific
the international, the multinational concerns that, like oil companies, they would go and drill in countries like Venezuela and take all the oil out, right? So stealing, cheap labor, suppression, making sure that the countries that had the wealth would not benefit from that wealth. And one of our the focus of the communist camp was to undermine American influence in the third world, to get into Africa, get into Asia. And so you remember that at one point there was in the US, there was this domino theory in Asia. When one country falls, the others might fall too. Mm-hmm. It wasn't totally off the wall. There was an active effort to actually do that. Whether it would have succeeded is another story, but...
So go back to that. Go back to that. So as a kid, when I was growing up, family, they had two different philosophies. One believed in imperialism, one believed in communism. But always when it came down to creating hatred towards a system, it was linked to a face or a name. So, it was this person, that person. So your hate was linked to which personalities during that time? Was it a president? Was it a author? Was it a philosopher? Who did they sell hate to?
Okay, it was usually the politicians. But it depended on the time. I remember growing up, I started reading just a little bit, and we had these magazines for kids. There were caricatures in those days of President Eisenhower, and Eisenhower became sort of a curse word. So we hated Eisenhower. We hated all American presidents. We hated Jimmy Carter with his damn, human rights policy. But then we really hated Ronald Reagan.
Well, why Ronald Reagan above others? Because he was the guy that lowered taxes and capitalism and all that, or?
No, because he was a warmonger. This was spread throughout the KGB because the KGB actually believed, because Ronald Reagan, because of his Christian background, saw himself as a helper to God to bring about the end of the world. We thought he would start a nuclear war, period. So, by the way, it's very interesting. One of the presidents we didn't hate, we actually pretty much liked.
Who?
And that was JFK.
Yeah.
Now, this was more just like because of his appearance, not necessarily because of his policies.
Makes sense.
But the charisma of an individual plays a huge role. And I still remember there was nobody in my generation that would not remember where they were when they heard that Kennedy was assassinated. We just like, oh my God, what's going to happen now?
Wow.
Well, Kennedy actually was a pretty lousy president, particularly when it came to foreign relations.
Yeah, so many people would agree with you on the fact that this guy was admired, loved because of his Hollywood-esque type of a personality, where he was the first Hollywood president that we had, if you really think about it, right? Yep. Pre-Reagan, pre-Trump, some of these other guys that were Hollywood. But go back to the story on what you were saying. So they found out you're a great student. They found out you're a card-carrying communist. They said this guy's pretty smart. He's pretty intuitive. He's stand out. Let's figure out a way. So go from there, that part of the story.
All right. So I'm now sort of making this up. The KGB had in all the countries where they operated, they had volunteers from that country that worked with them, and so they engaged one of those volunteers to approach me. And for some reason, they decided to send a German first. I don't know why. I would have gladly talked to a Russian. So it was on a Saturday. I'm sitting in my dorm room, and there must have been some knowledge for the individual who knocked on my door that I was in that room. It was my room, and B, that my roommate wasn't there because he always moved back to, he traveled home over the weekend. And in hindsight, I think that I had a student next door, a Russian exchange student. He probably tipped them off. Okay, so I get a knock on the door, and the interesting thing is, in those days, we had almost no outside visitors, and every knock on the door would mean I'm coming in. So you get a knock and the door opens. There was a knock and there was no door open. So I knew this was a stranger, and when I eventually told him the knock, I told the knock, come in. So a short guy comes in. He had a cast on his right arm, and this is really funny. It's the only KGB guy I had personal interaction with who I instinctively didn't like.
Didn't like?
No, didn't like him at all. He had the charm of a weasel. He had the face of a weasel, and he was pretty stupid. And I tell you why I'm saying he was stupid. So he introduced himself as a representative of a local big company that was actually known worldwide for its optical instruments, called Carl Zeiss Jena, still exists in Germany. He said, "Yeah, I'm come from Carl Zeiss Jena, and I just want to talk with you a little bit about what you want to do when you're done with your education." That was as dumb a pretext as you could have had, because he didn't even know that in those days, companies did not recruit in universities. You were assigned to a job, with minor exceptions. The very top students could pick where they would go, and they would typically stay at the university.
Now, was this guy you know how sometimes people act dumb, like if you Usual Suspect, Kaiser Sose acts crippled, or some of these movies. Was he acting like he's a weasel, or was he a qualified weasel?
No. He was dumb.
Okay,
he didn't know. He didn't.
We got to give him credit. I mean, he was a qualified.
It was very, very awkward.
Yeah.
The moment he started talking, in my mind, flashed Stasi. I knew that he was secret police. I didn't think KGB because he spoke German, right? And we talked back and forth a little bit of what it was like to study and all this, and then suddenly he did a 180. He said, "You know what? I really didn't. I didn't tell you the truth. I'm actually from the government." So I still revel in the idea. I had this thought that I should have asked him, "What branch of the government are you from?" I let it go. I didn't, I wanted to hear what he has to say, because I was curious. I was not afraid of the Stasi. I had a clean record, so I knew it would have been something, let's say, if not good, but at least interesting. So, and pretty quickly he asked the one question. He came to visit me, and that was the question. He said, "Well, could you imagine one day to work for the government?" And so I gave him an answer to a question that he didn't directly ask, but I said the following. I said, "Yes, but not as a chemist." So he had the answer to a question that he didn't ask directly, but we both had an understanding that I was open to continuing to talk about this, and it was quite clear that at that point I would have guessed that it would have to be espionage. And so we made an arrangement to meet at a restaurant in the following week, and at that restaurant he introduced me to another person. The person sat at the table, and he got up, and my friend, who had never introduced himself, I never knew his name, period, not even a cover name, he turned to me and said, "Oh, we're working with our Soviet comrades. Meet Herman." And then he said, I got something to do. I got to go. So, so 1, 2, 3, I was with the KGB, right? Because I knew that was KGB, Herman, right? And that, of course, made me proud and got me even more interested, because the one thing I knew, that the KGB was one mighty powerful organization, and to be associated with that organization would mean a whole lot of good. I never thought about the danger, because I'm a very optimistically wired individual, and danger to me is always an afterthought, usually after things happen.
Now, are you at that time a tough guy? Are you one of those, I don't know if you've seen the movie Good Will Hunting, where the guy's a genius, but at the same time he's also a tough guy. Who are you at that time?
Mentally tough, highly disciplined, very competitive. I tell you how competitive I was. I started playing basketball at the age of 18 at university. That was way too late. And I wanted to desperately be on the first team. I was assigned to the second team, and the first game I played, I was hit in the head with a ball. I had no clue. I had no fundamentals, and I was awkward to begin with. I spent 1 year practicing with 12-year-olds to learn the fundamentals. I was not afraid to, do that, and I made the first team, and I even made the first starting team. So I was extremely, whatever I took on had to be, I gave it 100%. Okay, tough. Mentally, yes. Physically, I was somewhat reckless. I got injured a lot in my youth. So, but not the not the military style toughness.
Got it.
That was not instilled in me, and I didn't have it. It was not innate to me.
So let's go back. So you get recruited. This is a proud moment. You cannot believe KGB is interested in you.
Yeah.
And this is an exciting time because you are a card-carrying communist, and if you're a card-carrying communist, you know, it's like being a Yankees fan, and the Yankees wants to recruit you to play for them. So this is a very big milestone in your life. So from there to being trained directly to going on your first mission, what does that timeline look like?
Okay, it was 1.5 years of unofficial relationship, loose relationship with Herman. We met sometimes once a week, sometimes every other week. He got to know me. He was the guy responsible for telling headquarters, the center in Moscow, you want this guy. And, you know, all of this for me was just play. I didn't realize it. I now know that every time we met, he wrote a report. He had to. And he figured me out, and they were looking, and I know that now because I gleaned this from interviews that were given by high-level, you know, retired KGB generals. They were looking for a particular set of character traits in people, about a dozen of them, that had to be in place for somebody to make an undercover, illegal sleeper agent, a lone wolf, right? And apparently, you know, I know that I fit that profile, and that's how I actually was really recruited, because the 1.5 years there was nothing. We were just talking, and he gave me some tasks. He gave me, for instance, a friend of mine went hitchhiking from East Germany through Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, into Bulgaria, and he asked me to describe my impression of these countries. He gave me some things to do. He gave me some minor tasks to knock on the door of a particular family and talk to them and find out about a relative of theirs in the West, which required a little bit of a ruse and stuff like so. So I hated doing this, but as I told you, I was ambitious. I couldn't fail, so I did it anyway. So
what were those characteristics? I'm curious. When he said there was about 10 or 12 characteristics, do you remember some of them? What were they?
Yes, I remember some of them. Not all 10 that I had written down. Acuity of intellect, quick decision maker, flexible in terms of situational changes. Obviously, hardcore communist. My favorite is well-controlled inclination to adventure.
Well-controlled
inclination to adventure. In other words, you had to have an adventurous nature, and just not afraid of new things, and ability to, you know, very quickly make good decisions. And I know I had all of this. I lost some of it, but I'm still better than most.
Do you remember any more? These are some. I mean, you listen. Some of the
I
ones.
Do you remember any more? I would have to look them up while we are talking. I can get back to you.
No, I'm just really curious for my own self. That was fascinating. You know, flexible of situational changes, quick decisions, well-controlled inclination of nature. Pretty wild. Okay, so now, you know, they ask you to go to this family and find out one of their relatives. Okay, you do that. You don't like doing that kind of stuff, but you're so competitive, so you're going to figure it out because you're not going to quit. Okay, so where are we going from there?
Well, and so there came a point. So I graduated from college. I had my degree, and I was already an employee of the university for a while. And at that point, the KGB pulled the trigger. I was moved. I was sent to Berlin for a 3-week sort of special training program, and that was my first sort of a trip that looked a little bit like I was spying, because I had to meet my new handler over there in Berlin, whom I didn't know, at a special place, a special time, with a exchange of code words. So I met him, and I met him every other day. He gave me a lot of Western literature to read, which was prohibited, and that made me feel good.
What were some of them? What were some of them he gave you?
Oh, particularly newspapers, magazines, Der Spiegel, Die Weltzeitung, and stuff like that. Uh, or also the Stern, which is more of a sensationalist magazine, was and still is.
Got it.
So just to give me a flavor of what the West looks like, because I didn't have a clue. See, there's one thing most East Germans had that I didn't have. They had West German television. They could receive it. I grew up in what they called the Valley of the Clueless, because for us to receive West German television, it would have required a huge antenna on your roof called the head of an oxen. And if you had this on your roof, you were toast. So no West German. I once visited a friend and I watched this cartoon and I said it was so great. It was the Flintstones in German. But anyway, so I had to be inured. I had to be shown slowly what it was like to be in the West. But anyway, I also had a practice trip to Berlin, West Berlin. I'm sorry, and I didn't know how important that was to them, because so all I had to do is I went twice. The first time I went. I took public transportation and went around a little bit, walked around, and also had a beer and a sausage. It was really good. And then I got back and there was nothing. The second time, they gave me a task, similar thing. Just go to a certain apartment building and knock on the door and talk to some people and find out about something. I forgot what it was, and I did well, and that was the deciding factor why they recruited me, because I found out much later that not all the recruits were able to do that, because, for me, I was entering enemy territory. I was entering enemy territory eventually with the intent of doing harm, and that scares the holy daylights out of a lot of people. I met an ex-classmate of mine who was in a similar situation for the Stasi, and when he came back from West Berlin, he told him, I quit. Guess what? He never had a professional, he never was able to work in his profession. I succeeded. So on the last day, my handler took me to the headquarters of the Soviet military in Berlin, and I met this little guy in the office who was extremely unimpressive, but the moment he opened his mouth, you know that guy had authority. He was most likely the head of the KGB in East Berlin. And he spoke, his voice was loud and metallic, and it was just like they had a phenomenal amount of psychological energy coming out of this little man. He also smoked like a bandit. He was most like in the war. War toughened guys in the Soviet Union were. Nothing toughens you up like war, when you see people like your friends dying left and right.
By the way, just out of curiosity, when a person couldn't make it through the KGB training after having been recruited by the KGB, what did the KGB typically do to that person?
Nothing. If you weren't qualified, they would let it go. And in my case, when the question is always asked when they actually asked the question, and I was just about to get to it. This guy asked me point blank, without any hint to me that it was coming. He said, "Well, are you in or not?" And I went like, "Huh?" But and I said, "Well, I don't know. I don't know if I'm good enough. I'm not trained. I need to learn this, and this." He said, "Don't worry about it. We'll train you. I just want to know, are you in or not?" And we only hire decisive people, so you got until noon tomorrow to say yes or no. That was a tough night because now all of a sudden this became real. Up until this point, I was playing, right? I didn't know it was. I was just waiting, and when that came, the reality of that move hit me hard, because fundamentally I had to become a different person, go to another country. Say goodbye to my past, to my friends, to my basketball team, and start over. And it would be somewhat dangerous. So, I went back and forth. But the the two things that actually got me over the finish line: A, the flattery of being recruited by the KGB, and B, the well-controlled inclination to adventure, because I just wanted to do something exciting.
That makes sense. So now you go in. At this point, did they immediately fly you out to Russia to go train by the KGB? The 2 years that you were there getting trained?
No. I was initially, they thought they would send me to West Germany. Makes sense, right? I'm a German, no language and cultural barriers. By the way, the Stasi had about 1,000 undercover agents in West Germany, some of them in the government in West Germany. So it was quite successful. And so the training initially was pretty much directed towards West Germany. One of the first pieces of literature they gave me was the Constitution of the Bundesrepublik. But there was apparently a rule that everybody who was trained to do this kind of work had to learn another language. And I was given the choice. And since I had really no problem whatsoever with English in high school, I said, I'm going to learn English. And so again, I decided I was going to learn English. That means I gave it 100%. And I threw myself into this task. I spent at least 3 hours a day doing something in English, either working with a tutor or reading English, learning vocabularies, studying grammar, and on and on. And within 9 months, I had amassed about 30,000 words, active vocabulary. I was able to read English novels in the original, and that got somehow to Moscow. And then Moscow said, well, they sent me a tape recorder and said, why don't you just say something in English? And it doesn't matter what it is. And I did. I recorded 20 minutes. And 3 days later, they got me on a plane to Moscow. Somebody just thought they had struck gold, because I am not aware. Now, there were a bunch of illegals that were sent to the United States at the same time I was, as a matter of fact, exactly 9. I am not aware that they sent any other one of those under the pretension of having been born in the United States. And they thought there was enough there that I might actually be able to reduce the German accent to a point where it was explainable. And I did. And that's how I wound up in the U.S.
Got it. How long did you do training in Russia?
In Russia, it was 2 years.
And during that time when you were in Russia, I saw one of the systems that they had for you, where what they were teaching you. But what do you remember learning during those 2 years in Russia?
A lot of the stuff I learned in Russia was actually maintenance, because the technical training, like Morse code, the decryption, encryption, photography, and secret writing, all of this I got in Berlin. And so I just practiced some so as to stay, to stay fit. In addition to English, which was the focus, in addition to English, what I really learned in Moscow was counter-surveillance. I worked with the best of the best. Those guys were the ones who would follow, CIA people, and I practiced with them, and I did very well.
It's funny because you ended up doing that. You ended up doing counter-surveillance for U.S. years later.
Yeah, this was very important.
Wow.
This gave me certainty in 2 instances. That was important. The first instance was when the KGB thought I was under investigation by the FBI, and I took all the measures that I had learned and that I had successfully deployed in Moscow, and I was pretty convinced that the KGB was wrong. I was right. And the second time is when I told the KGB to take a hike. I resigned, and I was just making sure that they weren't coming after me in some way. And after 3 months, not seeing a sign, I knew I was in the clear. So I sort of turned the weapon that they gave me against them. Well, it is what it is. This is how it works in espionage.
What did you learn with counterintelligence? What were like some of the things they you picked up from
Okay,
them?
well,
Like, if there would be specific strategies.
You familiar with the term SDR, surveillance detection route?
I'm not.
That is okay. That is a very well-known technique that is used by all kinds of spies in all kinds of countries and from all kinds of countries. That is, you see, in order for the like counterintelligence to figure out what you're up to, they need to follow you where you're going, right? You know, if you meet somebody, or if you exchange materials, or you can exchange materials by what we call the dead drop operation. That means you don't hand it to somebody; you just drop something someplace. And so, in other words, when you leave your house and you are under observation, somebody will follow you. And if you pick a route so that you have enough of the folks that typically it's a team, have to come close enough to you so you can see their face. If you do this often enough, eventually, if you see the same face twice, you know you're being under observation. The difficult thing is, after 3 hours of doing this, and you didn't see any sign to actually say, you know what, I'm in the clear. But because of I had about 10 practice runs in Moscow, and some of them I was being followed, some of them I was not, and I always was right.
What
so
was
that
your
gave
tactic?
me pretty good confidence.
Because you know, in the military they used to say stay alert, stay alive, right? And in business world they say only the paranoid survive. So the average person goes to a restaurant, they're looking at their table, the menu, the waiter, waitress. What are you looking at? What's your lens? Oh,
and this one thing that I've always had is awareness of what's going on around me, and that's still instinctive to me. You know, people who meet me say, "You're constantly looking all over the place." And I said, I'm not even aware of it. But a couple of other methods to find out whether your apartment or your house has been checked out by counterintelligence. I had a real the thing with the hair over the door. It's nonsense. It doesn't work. But I had this chest of drawers where the drawers had a bit of an overhang. So when you look at it, you couldn't quite see whether the drawer was totally closed or not. So I left it open 8 millimeters. You would have to go underneath to see that it's not quite closed. So if somebody goes in there and opens it, they will close it. So, and the first thing I always did when I got home, I checked for the 8 millimeters was always there. Another one you can do is send a letter to your own address from quote unquote somebody else. And when you seal the envelope, you leave a couple of spots you don't make them moist. So in other words, they're not glued. When counter surveillance, counter espionage opens letters, they usually do it mechanically and then glue it all together. So when it arrives and this is totally glued, you know that somebody opened it. You know, there's some things that I came up with myself. This letter thing I was taught. I was well prepared, and as a matter of fact, and that's not bragging, it's just it's a fact. I have a friend who used to work with illegals, FBI agent, and he said I was by far the best prepared of them all. Well, but they paid a lot of attention to me, and they invested a lot of time and money in me.
So to me, then what that means is the method to KGB is to literally know exactly who is the most qualified person to recruit and go get them. So you don't have to overtrain them. They already have the instinct. They already have certain abilities that they're watching. Did anything have to do with family, like a bad relationship with mom or dad, or falling out, or parents are not surviving, you don't have any kids? Did they look for those qualities? Because emotionally not being tied to anybody? Because historically, if you read about it, it's like the colder you are, the better you lead.
If I had a close emotional relationship with my mother, I would not have done this. If I had at the time a girlfriend who I was going to marry, I wouldn't have done it. but the relationship with my mother was not warm. It was okay, we weren't fighting, but it wasn't emotional. And so they knew that I wouldn't have any problem telling my mother some kind of a cock and bull story and then totally not explain to her what I was doing. That's correct. And the other prerequisite was not to have any relatives in the West, because one day you'll show up and you see Uncle Werner and he says, "What are you doing here?"
Makes sense. It
happens,
Yeah, of course. I bet. I totally, it makes sense to me. So when I read about this, and when you went to the States, go to museums, go learn, network with the elites, all this stuff. I saw a format for you. Your goal was, number one, get a U.S. passport. Number two, enter into American society. Number three, make contacts with foreign policy think tanks. Number four, get close to Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, Zbigniew, in order to influence policy. Why getting close to him? And if that was the outcome, what were some of the policies they wanted you to influence?
All right. We never went that far as what are you going to do once you get to know these people. I gotta disappoint you. The Brzezinski situation was it's a canard. There was that came out of the 60 Minutes interview. I never really told him that. They gave Brzezinski as an example of somebody who they would be interested in, but I'd never had the task. So my task was there were two tasks: A, to become a sleeper agent, become an American, right? Very important to them. And B was at least I met one fellow who did the same thing as I did in the United States, also a German. That was his only task. And I said to him when I met him, I hate you. I had other things to do. So no, I was my focus was political espionage. In other words, figuring out foreign policy, getting close to foreign policy decision makers, one of whom could have been Brzezinski, who, by the way, the KGB, I found out at one point, thought they could recruit him. No, that was a pipe dream. And or at least influencers, and so that's why the think tanks came up.
Such as who would you categorize as an influencer during that time?
At the time, and that they still exist. I was given three organizations. It was the Hudson Institute in New York. Mm-hmm. It's a conservative think tank. Mm-hmm. The School of International Relations at Columbia University, where Brzezinski actually, I think, was the head of that school for a while. And for some reason, and I still don't know why, but they had a focus on the Trilateral Commission, with Rockefeller. So they were focused on the conservatives. Now, here's the thing. For somebody who just, jumped off a potato truck, comes in the United States with absolutely nothing but a birth certificate, to get to a point where they could actually try to befriend somebody of that standing in society would have taken a while. And so we thought of a shortcut, and that was brilliantly devised, but poorly executed. Get a passport, you get your driver's license, your social security card, when you're done with this, you go get a passport. And once you got the passport, we send you to, let's say, Switzerland or Austria, where you can open up a company, and we know ways to make you very wealthy that way. And then you come back to the United States, you repatriate the money. I had the education, the class, the ability to operate amongst highly intelligent people. I would have been a really, really dangerous spy, because I could have probably, you come back with $5 million, lots of money in those days. Any country club will take you, right? And then you're there. You pick a country club where the employees of the foreign ministry is not called foreign ministry in the United States. That's, what I'm talking about. State Department. So, and then you just make friends, and before you know it, you're in. That didn't happen because both my handlers, but probably more so me, made a mistake in when we practiced how to fill out the application for a passport. And I tell you the two mistakes I made. I was too honest. So there was one question, what's your profession? And I wrote messenger, which was correct, but I was not a messenger who was working for minimum wage. I was a bike messenger who worked on commission, and I made enough money to actually support myself. That was bad. And the other one was, and the answers were optional. Where do you think you're going, and when are you leaving? And I left that blank. So you look at the clerk that looked at this application. He put two and two together. He said, he's a messenger who doesn't make any money. He doesn't know where he's going. He doesn't know when he's going. There's a little problem. And so he called me back and he asked me to fill out an auxiliary questionnaire. And I was still very hopeful and confident. I went to the back, I went to a table, looked at the questionnaire with a pen positioned, and I said, oh shit. First question, where did you go to school? Where did you go to high school? Well, I had a cover story with a high school, but that high school was not ever, never had a student named Jack Barsky. So I had to get out of there, and I managed to limit the damage in that I was able to reposition my application and my documents because they were still on the desk of the guy. I was fast enough, you know, he'll be talking about making a quick decision to do that, or else I would have been caught right then and there.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the more and more deeper we get, I'm sure you got 1,000,001 stories. I'd like to get right into it with a couple things I'd want to talk to you about in regards to Yuri Bezmenov. Did you and Yuri ever meet? Did you ever meet Yuri?
No, you're the first one. No, you're not the first one. There is there's an aura around Bezmenov that he built up, and gullible conservatives in the United States ate up. The man was a fraud. I'm sorry to disappoint you.
Tell me why he's a fraud, and based on which.
Okay. Bezmenov. First of all, Bezmenov was never KGB.
Okay.
That's a fact. Bezmenov had an association with the KGB as a journalist. His travel to the United States is quite interesting. At one point, he was stationed in India, and he decided to defect in some way, and so he disguised himself as a hippie, and he traveled around in India for a while, and eventually he must have connected with the CIA and wound up in the United States. And so Yuri Bezmenov wasn't much of anything, so he had to make a living. And smart enough he concocted this whole idea how the Soviet Union had this master plan to, in stages, to undermine the United States. Yes, they had a plan.
How do you know that? I'm curious. So from I was expecting you to say something like the way you did. I fully expected you to undermine Yuri 1,000,000%, because I know your background and I know which side you are politically. But I'm curious to know from your end, how do you know for a fact he was a fraud? How do you know he was not the real deal?
Okay, all right. He was not KGB. How would he? If the KGB was good at something, very good at something, and anybody who has had any contact with the KGB was keeping things secret. If they had this master plan, a journalist who's not even in the KGB wouldn't know anything about it. Number one. Number two, and this is my own observation. I was trained by some of the best, because I was one of the few elite agents that they sent in the United States. They had to give me the best. And some of those folks had spent some time in the United States as diplomats or maybe journalists, and they thought they knew something about the United States, and they didn't, because what the advice they gave me and the stuff they taught me was off the wall wrong, not correct. And it is pretty much acknowledged an agreement that neither the United States knew very much how the Soviet society operated, and neither did the Soviet Union.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to ask is, how do you know he was a fraud, though? How do you, for a fact, know Yuri was a fraud? I'm curious.
No, I'm just saying it out loud because I don't know for a fact.
Okay, so you're just speculating, is what you're saying.
But it's speculation that's based on personal knowledge, and it's based on if the KGB had such a plan, as I said, they wouldn't have told him. Secondly, I know what they did, and I know, you're familiar with active measures? Very
much so.
Okay, active measures was a focus, particularly on Andropov, and this is factual. This comes out of the archives of the KGB. There's a guy who was archivist, and he smuggled out a bunch of material by the name of Mitrokin, and active measures were somewhat successful, and that's how you try to undermine the United States. But if that was the best they had, where does the other plan come from? They couldn't even come up with one.
What do you mean?
It makes no sense.
Stalin came up with it in 1923, where the disinformation program that was come up with years ago, Subversion by Sun Tzu, which the ultimate way to beat your opponent is to manipulate and think you're not really fighting them by using somebody else in a proxy war, and they were very effective. I mean, if you're gonna say so, here's what I want to do. Here's what I'd want to do. I want to play the clip of Yuri, and you know which clip I'm going to play for you, and I'm going to go through the 3 steps, and I want you to tell me which part of what he says is a complete lie and doesn't make sense. I'm just curious.
We spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets used the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it? Ideological subversion is the slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, actively мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interest of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow and is divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years, actually it's overfulfilled because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who is demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boat crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization.
So which part of what Yuri just said do you disagree with?
Now, let me just start with what I agree with. He talks about active measures, and that is accurate, it's correct. He also talks about the demoralization of the nation and he actually makes a good point. This is primarily happened internally, all right, and a lot of this, in my view, started with the Vietnam War and the anti-war protest movement. He does not make the connection. He doesn't connect the dots between what the KGB did and what happened in the United States. That is not there, and he can't make it because he can't prove it.
Forget about that. I don't care about that. What I care about is how much of what he's saying actually was done and has credibility, because it's tough to dispute that Russia didn't successfully inject the spirit of communism and Karl Marx in U.S. universities and get younger kids to believe that Marxism is the way to go. I mean, if you look at some of the surveys that's coming up right now from Harvard University, 64% of students at Harvard support socialism, and they don't like capitalism. So it was an effective method, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the question is, how did they do it, and who did it? They didn't have a lot of people in the United States that could have done this. This was homegrown. Communism and this whole idea of, everybody getting along together is an extremely attractive ideology for young people. You don't need much. Now there have been liberal socialist streaks in America historically, going all the way back, and they have grown, and they have particularly taken hold in universities and academia, and so I agree that we now have already two generations who have been taught by people who became anti-American during the Vietnam War. Now, did the Soviet camp contribute to all of this? Of course we did, but the KGB itself, and this is where I think I'm saying that Bezmenov is a fraud, had nothing to do with it, because they weren't really capable of doing what he said they were doing.
They weren't really capable of doing what they said they were capable of doing.
Let me try to point out the facts of the matter. The active measures, as I said, under Andropov, who was in charge in the 80s, he actually issued a command that everybody in the KGB should be involved in active measures.
Okay.
It was really important to him.
Yeah.
But the department in which active measures were executed was not very desirable. So, first directorate, the one that did espionage, that was the number one. I forgot the directorate that did active measures. That was for losers. This is a quote out of Mitrokhin that came out of the study of the archives of the KGB. They had some successes, and they failed miserably in many other respects. Now, I'll give you a couple of successes. J. Edgar Hoover being a cross-dresser, that was planted by the KGB. The CIA inventing the AIDS virus, that was planted by the KGB. And there were a few other cases where they were able to discredit.
So J. Edgar Hoover was never a cross-dresser?
No, he wasn't.
You're saying J. Edgar Hoover was never a cross-dresser?
He was not. I mean, I can only tell you that, assuming that the notes that Mitrokhin took in the archives are absolutely 100% good, and I tell you what, there is a lot of proof that they are that we don't know about, because there's a lot of agents that went belly up after these notes came out. So assuming that he is correct, he says that was an active, he traces his back, how this story was planted.
You sure you're not right now using some active measures to confuse the hell out of the rest of the world? Because I'm going to flip it on you a little, because if I look at the 7 steps of active measures that they taught, number 1 is disinformation, blew up in U.S., fake news, all these scandals, nonstop. Number 2 is propaganda. Number 3 is deception. Number 4 is sabotage. Number 5 is destabilization. Number 6 is subversion. And number 7 is espionage, which you briefly talked about. I want us to go back to what our friend here has to say, part 2, and then I'm going to come back and we'll wrap it up. He's about to be done, So let's hear what he has to say. This guy that is apparently full of it.
Destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation. What matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. Your leftists in United States, all these professors and all these beautiful civil rights defenders, they are instrumental in the process of the subversion only to destabilize the nation. When their job is completed, they are not needed anymore. They know too much. Some of them, when they get disillusioned, when they see that Marxist-Leninists come to power, obviously they get offended. They think that they will come to power. That will never happen, of course. They will be lined up against the wall and shot. But they may turn into the most bitter enemies of Marxist-Leninists when they come to power. And that's what happened in Nicaragua. You remember most of these former Marxist-Leninists were either put to prison or one of them split, and now he's working against Sandinistas. It happened in Grenada when Maurice Bishop was already a Marxist. He was executed by a new Marxist who was more Marxist than this Marxist. Same happened in Afghanistan when first there was Taraki, he was killed by Amin, then Amin was killed by Babrak Karmal with the help of KGB. Same happened in Bangladesh when Mujibur Rahman, very pro-Soviet leftist, was assassinated by his own Marxist-Leninist military comrades. It's the same pattern everywhere.
So which part of what he said, demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization with, the Marxist-Leninist ideas spreading in America, which part of that do you disagree with?
Well, according to what he said, we should be way past stabilization. He said like 2 to 5 years, and this is on a couple of weeks, and then the tanks roll in and all that stuff. That's vastly exaggerated. I can't disagree with a lot of the things that he said, but he says it with such authority that he was not a dumb guy. Right? What
I'm trying to ask you is, we've been speaking for 45 minutes, for the first 45 minutes. You were very calm. You were good to go. The moment Yuri came up, that was the first time you crossed your arms and you seemed upset. What about this man, he has to say? Forget about him as an individual. Which part of what threat he's given America to be worried with are you so upset about?
No, I tell you what makes me upset.
Tell me.
You probably know that I'm quite conservative. my ideology, I call myself a conservative libertarian constitutionalist.
Okay.
I have a strong belief that the conservative end of the political spectrum in the United States is shooting the cause in the foot by believing in some things that are way off, that are not connected to facts, not connected for the truth, and they fall for people like Bezmenov because it fits their narrative. And that's where you get these people that are way to the right, QAnon and some others that do harm to our cause. I have scientific training.
Who's your favorite conservative president? I'm curious.
Ronald Reagan.
Okay, so what did you think about Clinton as a president?
For a Democrat, he wasn't so bad. He was just a philanderer. But in terms of he actually pulled back some of those social measures, like workfare instead of welfare.
Yeah.
And he was sort of almost in the middle. And maybe figures like Clinton were in the way of that whole scheme that the KGB cooked up. The KGB wasn't strong enough to do what Bezmenov says they were doing and succeed.
What do you think about Trump or Obama or Biden? Curious.
Oh, the last two, they were in my view, the worst and the second worst president in the United States.
Which ones, Trump and Obama?
No, the last two.
Trump and Biden.
And Biden.
Okay.
Trump, I would vote for him tomorrow if he were to run again. I'd rather have somebody who knows how to behave. He really caused some damage to the conservative cause by not listening to advisors. He must have had that advice not to have that rally on the 6th, because he should have known that there would be some people, some nutcases, who would do what they did and give tons of ammunition to the Democrats who think, who call this an insurrection and an uprising, a bunch of nonsense. But he should have known better. But his policies, I can't think of a single major policy that he implemented that I disagree with.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Last 18 months, go from February till today. So whatever that makes it, February till today. Last 21 months that we've had, right? And what I'm saying is COVID, right? Riots, protesting, all that stuff. Speak from your paranoid side, okay? Speak from the paranoid side of Jack, of Albrecht. Who was behind dividing America the way we've been divided the last 21 months? Was it internal? Was it Xi Jinping? Was it China? Was it Russia? Was it the Democratic Party? Was it the Republican Party? Was it the mainstream media? What caused America to be as divided as we were the last 21 months? Curious.
Well, the seeds were already in place. I mean, we have as you know, we have our homegrown left, and we've had anarchists. I mean, remember way back when the Black Panthers and I forgot this other group that Obama's ex-friend belonged to. Terrorists. We had them, and I think what happened here is the ideological work that the leftist professors did in the colleges actually bore fruit.
Yeah,
and more people believe in this nonsense. I mean, this is, again, they're looking at stuff, and Bezmenov said, right, they're looking at stuff, and it's a reporter standing in front of a burning building and says, it's a peaceful demonstration. That's some of the things that Bezmenov says are just absolutely right on the money, but he twisted it a little bit. I believe it's internal. But
don't you think for a person who comes from that word, the whole Sun Tzu concept is to make it seem like nobody else did it. It happened, you did it to yourself. Isn't that like the whole concept of subversion? Confuse the shit out of the enemy, making them think they did it to themselves. Rather, we manipulate it behind closed doors.
You can do that. That would be wonderful. But there are people in this country who are doing it to other people.
I know that. Yeah, sure. I'm aware of that.
Those are the people that live high on the hog and
we're on the same page there.
Okay.
What I'm trying to say is those guys that you just talked about, let's stay on that. So those guys you just talked about that are doing it to other people internally, somebody converted them. Who is the people that converted them? Like, you get what I'm saying?
Wait a minute. It needs, it takes converting a good person and make a bad person out of them. I believe very strongly that there is a lot of evil potential in almost everybody. And some people are more evil than others.
Yeah.
And some people are more power hungry than others. And if they get a chance, and unfortunately our political system with a political class enables people like that. Okay, and so there's something also. We need to get back to the principles of the Constitution, because the Constitution wasn't set up to have a political system, to have a huge bureaucracy, to have a vast central bureaucracy. This is where the left is going, and I believe that communism is not the end of this kind of development. It's going to be some kind of an oligarchy, because you think those powerful magnates of industry, particularly the ones in big tech, will just say, okay, have it, give it to the state. No, communism means the state owns the means of production. You know that. That's not going to happen. There's going to be, this is like Russia, or maybe like China. China has private industry, but God forbid if you say something against the central government, you disappear. So it's different. It's a dictatorship by any other name, and neither communism nor this, they're all bad. And because what they imply that the majority of people lose their freedom to make decisions for themselves.
Yeah, it's that's why I wonder what part of what this man said do you disagree with? So are you saying the only thing you disagree with, that KGB wasn't powerful enough to make America, divide America? You're saying they didn't have that kind of power?
I say that vastly overrated. In many respects, I worked with these guys. They were totally uninformed about what's going on in the United States, and they didn't know what they didn't know. That's my own personal experience.
Yeah, man, isn't that like the ultimate? A guy was at my house yesterday, 2 nights ago, and we're sitting there till midnight. We're having a conversation together, and he brings up an old enemy, okay, an old enemy that did whatever he can to put me out of business. And this is a deceptive guy. This is a manipulative guy. This is a sharp, persuasive, manipulative, charming, conniving. He's got all those qualities, all the qualities of a great enemy. So he says, he starts telling me stories about this guy that maybe him and the two had issues together. He says, so what do you think about this guy? I said, I trust him 100%. His jaw drops. He says, what do you mean you trust him? I said, you have no idea how much I trust the guy. How could you trust this guy? I said, I trust the fact that every morning he wakes up hoping we'll go out of business. I trust him.
Yeah.
I fully trust him. So the point I'm trying to make to you is, how are you so trusting of the lack of influence and manipulative abilities a country like Soviet Union, Russia would have to change Western philosophies? You're like underestimating them, no?
You got to know the enemy if you want to defeat the enemy. They didn't know the enemy. They didn't know the enemy well. But we're not talking about the military. We're not talking about society. And that's my final answer.
So who was the enemy? Who was the enemy that KGB didn't know? So let's just say KGB thought John was the enemy, but Adam's really the enemy. Who was Adam?
No, how the enemy functions, how the enemy thinks, what's their strengths, what's their weaknesses.
So they didn't know how America functioned?
Not really, no. They believed in their own ideological simplifications of how the United States and its economy operates. You think they had any idea of the roots in the Constitution? No, it was we believed in our own propaganda, and the ones, and here's the thing, the ones that should have been successful and should have been involved in the active measures to do what Bezmenov says were the ones that worked with me, and they fell short, in my view. So I'm sorry. We're not going to agree on this point, which is fine. I respect your opinion, but you're not getting me off of mine.
No, I mean, I don't think I will, because your life is not going to make. I sat down with a former FBI agent last week or 2 weeks ago. Was it 2 weeks ago? Jim Clemente? Jim Clemente, okay. and 20 plus years FBI. His brother was an FBI agent, fully qualified FBI, and true believer FBI. Like, there's a reason why he became an FBI agent. There was a motive behind it, what happened with his personal life when he was younger. We won't get into that right now. So I said, tell me about nurture versus nature. You know, like a guy that ends up becoming a killer and takes someone's life. Is it nurture, is it nature? I love the way he used it, and I think it kind of validates your point. Here's what he said. He said, genetics loads the gun.
Yes.
Okay. He said personality and psychology aims the gun. And then he says experiences of your life makes you pull the trigger. So are you saying some people are born evil and they just can't help but divide?
What about the guy who just drove his SUV into a crowd? That's insane. And there's all kinds of like killers and murderers. What about Stalin, who and Mao, who oversaw, and Hitler oversaw the killing of millions of their own people? How is that trained? It's got to be in you. Okay, and I believe what your FBI man said, that it's true. I actually once met a couple of triplets that were separated at birth and brought up in three different families, three different settings, and they were incredibly alike. You're probably familiar with them.
Of course, they did. Yeah, of course, they did a documentary on them.
Yes, and I actually tutored each one of them, so I knew them well.
Get out of here.
Yes, I was in college with them.
What a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your point is Hitler was born evil. It's not the fact that they made fun of him and didn't let him go into that one school or institution that offended him, that made him want to say, for the rest of my life, I'm going to get my vengeance.
Yes, that's my claim. And yes, and there had to be other things that to fall into place, triggers, and enablement, right? So you cannot act on your evil nature just because you want to. You have to be positioned in that way.
Jack, I got two more questions before we wrap up to finish this off. One of them is honeypot. The whole Red Sparrow story. How much truth is there behind that?
A lot.
Oh, so that one is true.
Oh, yes, a lot. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. There were the best of them was actually East Germany. But they had the Romeos. They worked with men. Yes. Oh, sex and espionage historically has always been a great marriage, so to speak.
And then the other question is, last but not least, to wrap up. This is your world, meaning I'm assuming you still kind of follow this world, follow what's happening, follow the news that comes up that has to do with your world. Who, if you were sitting there and you were the advisor to Trump or Biden, I'm talking the last two presidents, and they bring you in to work as a consultant, who would be your top three enemies that you'd have to look out for if you're advising the American president? Who are the three enemies we should look out for today?
Okay, number one, China. Absolutely China. Number two, ourselves. And number three, pick them. Russia, Iran. Iran and North Korea are too small. If they start something, they get destroyed. So.
You put China at the top. Why do you put China at the top?
Because the Chinese are very deliberate. They have a long-term vision. They always had it, and they got their act together, and they are slowly getting to a point where they become almost equal, if not a little bit bigger economically and militarily, and they're not stopping. And what Trump did, he did the right thing. He was actually looking at them as a very dangerous adversary, and now we are loosening those reins again. This is definitely a possibility that my great-grandchildren will have to learn Quechuan or whatever the language is called.
Do you almost need a president like Trump to be able to handle a country like China? Do you need somebody strong to go up against them, or that's irrelevant?
Strong and to some degree unpredictable, as long as he is clear as to why he's unpredictable. Because they don't want to die. None of them want to die. Only the maniacs want to die. The Chinese leaders don't want to die. The Russians don't want to die. The Soviets didn't want to die. So, but watch out for the maniacs.
Well, Jack, I can talk to you for hours. I appreciate you for making the time and being open to the questions and the discourse that you and I had. This was fascinating interview. Really, really enjoyed it. We're going to put the link to your book below, Deep Undercover, so people can go get it and find out more about your story. We didn't even cover half the stuff that you shared about your life, so I'd love for them to go find out more about that. But Jack, I'll give the final thoughts to you before we wrap up. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you very much. This was very intense, and it was an example where two people can disagree and still like each other.
I think I like you a lot. So
it was pretty hard arguments, and then you put me on my toes, particularly since I wasn't exactly prepared. So I had to come up with on the spot with some arguments. That's fine, no problem. And I think I at least passed. I just want to put one plug in addition to my book. There's a podcast out that is about my life. It's called The Agent and can be listened to on all the major audio streaming platforms. It's professionally produced. It's really good because it has people other than me in it. It's not just me talking, but it's the agent, the FBI agent who was the lead on my case and how they were operating. It's just like, and a lot of historic background. So
I'm going to put the link below. I'm looking at it right now. The Agent, Imperative, is a remarkable true story. Jack Barsky, the longest surviving known member of the KGB illegal programs operated during the height of Cold War. We'll put the link to that below as well for folks to go listen to it. But either way, Jack, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
So, and one of those days, if we happen to be in each other's neighborhood, I would like to meet you in person.
I would love to do the same as well. Once we shut this down, maybe I'll talk to you about something. But again, thank you for your time.
Okay, well, you're most welcome.
Take care. So I'm curious, who do you believe, Yuri or Jack? Do you believe what Yuri had to say or Jack? Comment below. If you enjoyed the interview, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. I got 2 other interviews for you. One of them is with Clint Hill. This interview got 6-7 million views. It's the former Secret Service agent to 4 presidents and Jackie Kennedy. He was the first guy that jumped on top of the car when John F. Kennedy got assassinated. The other one is a sit-down I did with Ayman Dean, who was a former spy for MI6 that used to be with the Al-Qaeda. It's a very interesting story. He had a chance to meet Osama bin Laden. Very interesting. If you've not seen that, click over here. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.